teachers of Reddit, what former students of yours are now famous or infamous, and did you foresee their outcome? Well, students of yours? My dad, who passed away last fall, was a high school teacher in the Minneapolis school district for over 25 years. He had Prince as a student for one term. When I asked what he was like, my dad said he was short and quiet. We had this conversation before Prince became a megastar, so it wasn't a big deal at the time. I never asked about it again. Probably should have. I taught two brothers in middle school. I can remember their father coming to school and threatening to beat up a teacher that he claimed was bullying one of them, giving a demerit. A few years later, one is in jail for accessory to killing a police officer and the other for trafficking heroin. Shit apples. ESL teacher. One of my students was a National Geographic photographer who knew he could get out of being late occasionally if he saved some of his unpublished shark photos for me. My current boss is my ex-student. I told him he should stay on at university and do a PhD. He didn't, but rapidly climbed the ladder of my organization and now decides what I do. He's a bright kid. It's the best feeling when your student achieves. My grandfather taught history to Kate and Pippa Middleton. I think he said they were nice girls. My Latin teacher taught Fred West, one of the UK's most notorious serial killers and child murderers. He said he was always shoot at Latin, but gave no particularly bad warning signs. I taught Alexis Capri Anderson when she was in high school. She was a nice enough kid, but had some indications of a rough home life and maybe drug problems. She went on to become a pronoun star who also happened to lock herself or get locked in a bathroom in a New York hotel room while a coked out Charlie Sheen wrecked the shit out of the place. I think he later sued her for extortion or something. I won't say infamous, but one of my students is a model at fetish conventions and has a website where people can buy clips of her having sex with men and women, sometimes while using a strap-on. She also does some cosplay at Comic Cons. And no, I did not foresee that outcome. Edit, Miss Jaya Love. My grandma taught Darius Miles, former NBA player. She said he wasn't the sharpest crayon in the box. When I was in elementary school, he used to stop by the school quite a bit and everyone flipped out over his fancy car. Went to school with a certain ginger singer. He was always in the music rooms during our breaks and I can remember him performing at a Christmas assembly. He was very good, but never would have guessed he would be as big as he is today. Two students come to mind. Luke Holland, pretty famous YouTube drummer, started doing covers in high school and then got picked up by some other bands. I knew he was going to go places. I just wish you that one of these days he will play a mallet instrument on something. I made him learn his scales and told him that he could use that skill someday in the studio. This is his most famous cover. https://www.youtube.com/watch v=HUGFQKUZRVUMYLES Garrett. Last year's #1 pick in the NFL draft. The kid was larger than life in HS and was one of the most down-to-earth young men I've ever met. As the band director of the school, we would see each other after every football game. He would come up and shake my hand, thanking me for what I'm doing with the band program. 100% class act, and I hope he has a fruitful career in the NFL. My old boss was a high school English teacher and had John Mayer as his student. Despite Mayer's well-known dickishness, my boss was quite friendly with his parents, and as a musician himself, he shared a lot of his own songs and CDs to them. And then John Mayer used one of his album covers for his own without permission, so he hates him, and I remember he always switched the Spotify channel if John Mayer's song came on at his bar. Somewhat relevant, when my late great uncle was young, he was in a band that became fairly well known locally. They would play gigs at local bars and fairs and eventually go on a small tour in our region. He met a country music musician that would later become quite famous, but in the early days, before either of them were doing much of anything, they would hang out at my great grandma's house out in the country and write songs together. Eventually the country artist went on to use some of those songs in his albums after he became famous. My uncle never made a big deal about it. He figured they'd both written the songs, so he let it go. Then, several years later, he came home and spent some time with my uncle. One night, my uncle played a song for him that he had written, and eventually that song ended up being a major hit on one of his albums, with no credit given to my uncle. My uncle's music career fizzled out, wasn't much of a career to begin with, and he passed away a few years later. That side of my family is pretty bitter about the whole thing, and still holds a huge grudge. I think it's all pretty humorous. I'm not actually sure how much of the story has been embellished over the years, and I refer to it as the family urban legend, which pisses them off. I have a student who is a meteorologist in Texas. I follow him on Twitter and EM now and again. Otherwise, no one big yet either way. Wait, does a charge of Grand Theft Auto count? My old next door neighbor claims to have taught Rick Astley. My brother teaches in Springfield, Ohio, and had John Legend in middle school. Brother says he won the talent show that year. I had a kid who was super smart, but came from a rough family and neighborhood, not Springfield, Ohio. Lots of gang activity. The kid had two paths to choose from, academia or neighborhood. He chose the neighborhood, and is now in prison for murder. Unfortunately, we saw it coming, did our best to steer him towards using his smarts to break the cycle, but it didn't work. It's been about 10 years now and still breaks my heart. I've taught 3 attempted murderers, so there is that. Actually, a teacher I have had students go on to do important things that make me very proud, that Reddit would probably not care about very much. An important human rights lawyer, another person who is working on a team making breakthroughs in some kind of random bacteria/algae studies lol. The most exciting for most people would probably be teaching a football player who went on to play for an NFL team. And yes, I occasionally watch his games and wait to hear his name. I feel all warm and fuzzy when I see my former students do great things and brag about them on Facebook and stuff. Chance the Rapper went to my school, Chicago City College, and dropped out because he got famous/lots of money. I had a creative writing professor last semester who is still pissed off at him because he dropped. I'm like, who the frig would stay here at a 2-year college instead of signing a freaking record deal? But yeah, proof is still bent and gets irritated when talking about it, lol. Edit, took out the word signed because Chance didn't sign shoot. My bad. I'm a teacher, but I'm too young for my students to have gotten famous yet. I did apparently go to school with Brian Silver, the Gratata guy from Vine, and he was about as much of a d-bag as you'd expect. Girl I went to school with is Farrah Abraham from Teen Mom. Not a teacher, but a kid I went to school with became a serial bank robber. He was caught robbing a convenience store in high school, and when he was free he moved on to bigger fish. My dad taught and coached Wiz Khalifa for a year. Always said he was a fool. Went to high school with Rudy Gay, NBA player now. About the nicest guy in the world. Very soft spoken and shy at the time, but we were all thrilled with his personal success. Everyone knew he was NBA bound, but it didn't seem to affect anything as far as his treatment. His family was extremely nice as well. One of my friends had Rudy sign his birthday card, and he said he was going to keep it and auction it off one day when Rudy was famous. Wonder if he did. My uncle taught Prince Harry to fly Apache helicopters. He said he was just a really nice normal guy, which I think is what most people expect him to be like, to be honest. I'm a student, and a kid I grew up going to school with got drafted to the NHL last year in the first round. In careers class, when asked what he wanted to do, he said pro hockey player, and the teacher just laughed and kinda pushed it aside. Good on him for proving her wrong, but he's pretty stupid, so without hockey he didn't have much else going for him, so it's good he's making it. My wife taught Demetrius Pagotsis in 5th grade. By her memory he was an odd, but very sweet and well-liked kid. This whole thing has got her really shook up and confused. She says there are kids you wouldn't be surprised to do this sort of thing, but Demetrius wasn't one of those kids. The whole thing has been a mindfreak for her, especially because 2 other former students of hers were killed, as well as the oldest sibling of a current student. One of former students who was killed, she described as one of her favorite students she's taught. A very bright kid who she felt was going places. Just sad all around. My social studies teacher taught Raven Simone, and my teacher ended up calling Raven to come visit our school and we all got to meet her. She even spent extra time with us during our social studies class. It was kind of great meeting my favorite actor growing up. She was also super nice. A teacher now, but back when I was a practicum student, there was a girl who was insanely talented at dirt bike racing. After she graduated from high school, she became a professional dirt biker. She's since then changed gears to something new. A student introduced me to Vivian Sue HSU when I was teaching ESL in Tapari. She'd sit in on our one-to-one classes. She was gorgeous and funny. I knew Vivian was taking acting lessons, but I didn't expect she'd go on to become an international star. Not a teacher, but Macklemore Ben Haggerty was a classmate of mine in high school. He seemed exactly like every other burnout, skipping class to mill around outside and smoke. "I'm gonna be a rapper" is a super common dream among the multitude of dropout losers of America. It's right up there with "I'm going to play basketball/football" and needless to say, most don't make it. When he dropped out and fell to drugs, like so many others, it surprised nobody. Then he turned it all around and became super successful. I guess it helps that he wasn't actually as disadvantaged growing up as the rest of the dropouts. I don't know what's going on in this thread, but I literally recognized none of the famous people names in here. I'm half convinced people are just making up names here. Not a teacher, but I went to school with Daryl Robert Kenny murderer and his siblings. The sister of Randy Schoenwater, attempted child rapist turned murderer, and my brother and I were bullied by Curtis and Kathy Jones, murderers from our school. They all went to the same church youth group at some point, along with another guy I went to church with in my religious days, who ended up on to catch a predator. That church school was fricked. All from Brevard County, Florida if anyone googles these folks. I subbed in Compton the same time Kendrick Lamar was in elementary school. I can only say I subbed at the school he attended. So, I don't know if I actually taught him, but my son thinks it's pretty cool. Always good to get dad points. I'm a teacher and coach. Coached this kid, but never had him in class. Good football player, student and all around kid. Went to a Division II school to play football, and was in pre-med. Turns out he became a serial bank robber. Hit 20+ banks in a 3-year period. I had moved out of state and lost touch with him, so I don't know what drove him to do that. It seemed like he had so much going for him. He pleaded guilty and I think is doing 15 to 20 years. I went to high school with Jamal Adams, who was the 6th overall pick in the 2017 NFL draft. We also ran track together. He was extremely entitled and got away with doing anything he wanted. Football players in Texas high schools are basically given God status, especially when they are good. On several occasions, he got caught cheating on tests with absolutely no repercussions. If it were any other student, they would have automatically failed the class, and every member of the faculty would have been notified about the incident through email. He also never showed up to track practice on time, usually showing up with fast food. Whenever he arrived, our school didn't have off-campus lunch when I went there, so he would just leave campus knowing that he could get away with it. The coaches never questioned it. If you weren't friends with him, he was notoriously a jerk. His dad, who was also an NFL player, is also a complete douche-nozzle, but that's a completely different post for a different day. When Jamal was first drafted, there were several articles about the whole father-son and how they had humble beginnings and all that crap. I could never take those articles seriously, knowing how both of them are in real life. I had Jimmy Garoppolo in my class. He was the school's QB and a very good student. His success doesn't surprise me. I have a friend whose college professor kept trying to hook him up with his daughter. My friend wasn't interested. She turned out to be Lucy Liu. Edit. It was pointed out her dad wasn't a professor, but it did list civil engineer, which is similar work that my friend did. This was 10 years ago. Memory is fuzzy. Not a teacher, but I took a class in college with Nathan Griffith, who dated and had a kid with Janelle Evans from Teen Mom 2. I know next to nothing about the dude besides the fact that he has been arrested a bunch of times. He was always pretty cool in the class we had. He asked lots of questions and generally tried, as far as I could tell. He would talk to everyone before the class would start and was a pretty social dude. He also never brought up the fact that he was on Teen Mom or involved in any of that stuff. I had no idea for the first week or so and only found out from the girls who sat near me who were gossiping about it and then decided to look him up. One of my former athletes who was a student where I taught barged into my room the very first day of school, my first day teaching, and asked me when we'd be going on a date. I was obviously flustered and upset as he was 18 and I was only 23 and didn't want my reputation tarnished. Fast forward to 3 years later, and he and another student murdered a girl and her unborn child. He is now on death row. I was surprised a little at first, but have grown less shocked as time has gone on. He exhibited plenty of erratic behavior, but as a teacher we always hope our students grow up and learn to deal with their problems in a calm and appropriate manner. Someone I had a few classes with in high school ended up becoming one of the top viners. I remember him saying he was fat for a while, and when I knew him, he had lost weight. Because of the transition I feel like he was kind of shy and didn't have a lot of confidence. It surprised me when I heard, but I was glad he got somewhere important. Almost immediately after I found out, I ran into him at the mall. I didn't want to come off as a fan or try to reconnect, only because of his fame, so him and I just awkwardly passed each other. I wish I stopped to say hi and congratulate him, now that I think back. I went to a high school near where Eddie Lacy, NFL player, went. He was an absolute freak of nature and HS. So much stronger and faster than everybody. Our team played his a couple times and he scored every time his hands touches the ball. Absolutely demolished us single-handedly. It was like a bunch of kids playing tackle football with Thor, the nicest guy on the planet. If he farmed someone into the shadow realm or trucked them into the turf, he would be the first person after the play to make sure they were okay. He didn't showboat or anything, just played the game and loved it. I was super excited to see him do so well on the Packers for a little while. Dude had elite hands. I hope he can figure it out again. So much fun to watch. I taught a kid who always insisted that he would be professionally doing something involving pro football. Brilliant kid, but what were his odds? Apparently good because he does scouting for a pro team. I had another student who I introduced to nuclear physics of super basic, mostly fission equals big book, who is now studying to be a nuclear engineer. Not famous yet, but I have faith. Obligatory not me. My late grandmother taught Kanye West in kindergarten and said that even then he was phenomenal. I believe she kept a few drawings of his that were unbelievable for someone his age. Former teacher. A student of mine was featured briefly on American Idol. The school made a big deal about it. I honestly never saw it coming. He used to make fun of guys that didn't act masculine enough. Go figure. A friend's mother was a high school teacher here where Canadian singer/composer Bryan Adams grew up and taught him in high school. There are lots of local folklore about him, but one thing stood out to me that she told me. He sat around in the halls a lot, playing an acoustic guitar, getting stoned and telling everyone he was going to be famous someday. That last part is what gets me. We all know a kid like that from high school, who reassured everyone he was going places as he sat around, doing nothing, being a procrastinator, and playing a guitar. Turns out, sometimes hard work isn't what gets you famous. Maybe sometimes, it's just raw talent. Say whatever you want about Bryan Adams, if you feel like it, but the man is a killer songwriter and arranger. It's not an easy skill to master or be good at. I'm an elementary music teacher. Several years ago I had a very talented little singer in my school who was always talking about go-kart racing. In fact, she often missed school to travel in a kart racing circuit. I always hoped she would pursue music because truly, she really was/is that musically gifted. Fast forward several years, and you might recognize her as Sarah Fisher, indie race car driver and owner of Speedway Indoor Karting. Obligatory not a teacher, but I did go to school with a guy who joined ISIS. He was supposed to work at the same first job as me, but never turned up. Coincidentally, my first boss's daughter knew him at university and also joined ISIS. My schoolmate got killed trying to escape. Kind of off topic, but seeing kids who worried me suicidal, isolationist, abuse survivors, etc. be alright, not perfect but just alright, is one of the best feelings in the world. I'm a teacher, but have taught nobody important yet. Is this better than all the not a teacher posts? A couple of my former students grew up and then went into my field and came back to work for me. That is an amazing feeling. My time to shine. Back in the 90s, when I was in grad school, I had a young summer research student working with me in the lab. She was from the Bay Area and was heading off to Yale in the fall. Her name was Anwadzaki. She went on to marry Sergey Brin and is now the CEO of 23andMe. So pretty successful. Eater. No, I didn't foresee her success, but she was really cute and I had a huge crush on her. My aunt had Chris Novoselic of Nirvana in her kindergarten class. Apparently he would draw the number 3 on its side, so it looked like a cursive W. Apparently it got to the point where she figured out he knew the difference, but he was just being stubborn. He thought that everyone should just consider the letters M and W and the number 3 as the same, because there are too many letters and numbers.
N